Drew here, and this is my review of Hunters on Prime Video. So, the show, for those of you who don't know, is the story of a diverse, air quotes, group of Nazi hunters living in New York City in 1977. And as the show goes on, they eventually discover that a bunch of high-ranking Nazi officials are trying to bring out the Fourth Reich. I'm going to say bottom line first, I think that a lot of people will like this series. A lot of people will not agree with me about this, but I think that it was only sporadically entertaining, and overall, it just wasn't very well written. A lot of people are going to see Jordan Peele's name on this show and think that he actually has something to do with it, but I would point out that Jordan Peele is an executive producer here, which essentially means nothing. If you look at all the things that people executive produce, you realize very quickly that someone can executive produce something, and it just doesn't mean anything. The reason I think a lot of people will enjoy this show is because it features Al Pacino, and he's on television, or, well, I mean, I guess it's technically a streaming service, but it's sort of, people use the terms interchangeably. So he's basically coming to a series for the first time. And, you know, it feels like kind of a big deal. There are a lot of major actors on streaming services right now. Meryl Streep has been on HBO recently. So it's a good place to be. And Al Pacino just recently got an Oscar nomination for The Irishman, so he's kind of riding high on that. And he does a good job here. I feel like he's in danger of veering into hoorah territory. He does a Jewish accent for the majority of the time here. He's playing an interesting character, though, and I think that helps. He doesn't get as much screen time as some people might expect, which I think might be a disappointment. The main character of this show is actually Jonah, who's played by Logan Lerman, who some of you might know from Perks of Being a Wallflower. Jonah is essentially Mike Ross from Suits. He's very smart. He's in love with a girl who is dating a guy that, let's just say she has questionable taste in dating this guy. And the show repeatedly tells us how brilliant he is and shows it in scenes to do with chess, or where he's solving puzzles that help the group to find the Nazis that they're hunting. And his story is wrapped up in personal tragedies that I won't go into here because I don't want to spoil the show for people who are planning to watch it. I felt, and I know a lot of people are going to boo-hoo me for this and say, oh, come on, but I have to say, I felt kind of leery of this show for a number of reasons. I felt that it kind of seemed to be validating torture. Ultimately, I didn't feel like it had a clear enough message to justify all the torture scenes that were included, and I really felt that the majority of these scenes were done sensationally for entertainment value. Obviously, this show owes a lot to Quentin Tarantino, to the Jew exploitation film that he made, Inglourious Bastards. In kind of finding a tone, I think it has this terrible imbalance because sometimes you feel like you're watching something that's a satire, but sometimes I felt personally like I was watching something that was just a standard issue drama. And I was actually able to enjoy it more as a standard issue drama than when it veered into the satirical territory, because I felt like it had surer footing when it was just trying to be a standard drama. And I felt like when it tried to be satirical, it wasn't good enough at getting its point across. And I feel like it kind of undercut itself and the themes it was trying to express. The way that it uses the Holocaust throughout this story is exploitative, and some people will disagree with me, and if you do, please let me know in the comments section. But I felt that it was exploitative because it wasn't being used entirely to draw attention to what actually happened and to real-life tragedies in the way that Schindler's List or The Pianist did. Instead, I felt like it was often being used to add agency, to add dramatic heft to these characters' origin stories, and it's very much a comic book sensibility of a show. In a way, it reminded me a lot of The Boys, because they're both about a group of people taking on evil, powerful people that have the protection of the U.S. government. And personally, I felt that because of the comic book sensibility, I felt that a lot of the elements that were more serious, such as talking about the real life types of tragedies that happened to the Jews, did not go down well. I also felt that the political messages of this show were at times too far. I think that you can object to the way that the Republican Party is leading America at the moment, but I think that the way that this show compares, through imagery primarily, compares them to the Nazis, essentially saying that maybe not all Nazis, well, not all Republicans are Nazis, but all Nazis would be Republicans. I think it's a step too far. And that's more political than I really want to get into on this channel, but I feel like a lot of people will get rubbed the wrong way by that. And I wouldn't really argue with them for being offended, because I do feel like the show a little bit went out of its way to offend them. The story, it started out weak, gets better, and then ended up on a really low note for me personally due to some last-second twists that I didn't think made a lick of sense. Maybe some people will think these twists made sense, but to me they were utterly ridiculous. I felt like the Nazi characters were very campy and underdeveloped. I felt like Greg Austin did a really good job, but I'm a little concerned that his character could be inspirational to white supremacists, because he's very powerful and he's very charismatic, and he's just the kind of villain that you worry people will maybe root for instead of booing. And there was one scene in particular near the end of the show where I felt they went too far with his character in the way that they portrayed him. That just the whiplash between the camp and the standard drama, I felt like did not serve this series well. And ultimately, because of that, it didn't really work for me, even though I will acknowledge there were some really, really clever and brilliant moments in it. I personally felt that I had concerns about this show for a number of reasons, and if you're the person who's easily offended, I think it could offend you. I also worry, as I said before, about how they portray torture in this show, and I worry that if you're someone that was a Nazi, you could literally watch this show and go, yeah, wow, here's another great torture porn scene where they're torturing a Jewish person, and I strongly objected to that. So personally, I don't offend easily, so I watched it all the way through, and I don't have a problem with other people who enjoy it, but I definitely wished that the showrunners, and I'm sure they didn't intend for any of these things, I'm sure that the showrunners 100% think that the Holocaust was a bad thing, and that was part of the reason that they made this show. But I still feel that, perhaps not through having a strong enough, clear-cut message, they might have had a little bit of moral irresponsibility in the way that they told the story. But those are just my thoughts. So if you thought differently, please let me know in the comments section. And if you want to see more reviews from this channel, please hit the subscribe button and give me a like. Thanks. That's Plot First's review of Hunters.